One of the things we revisited this chapter was factoring. So you'll have a little bit of that on the test. The difference of two squares, that's one. Remember, if we have a squared minus b squared, if we have something squared minus something else squared, we get a plus b times a minus b. Right? Because when we distribute that, those middle terms cancel out, and we're just left with a squared minus b squared. So when you have two terms, you want to take a look at that. See, can I factor it this way? Is this something squared? Is this something squared? So the other way to kind of think of it is, can I take the square root of both of these? So square root of 4x squared is just 2x. And the square root of 25 is 5. So we're going to have 2x plus 5 and 2x minus 5. Now, if we can't do the square root of both of these, then it's not the difference of two squares. Then we won't be able to do that. But in this case, we can. For the next one, leading coefficient of 1, remember if we have a trinomial, three terms, we're going to try and factor that into two binomials. And when it's just a 1x squared, that's the easier type. We'll look at the harder one in a second. But we know that the first two terms are going to multiply to give us x squared, so that's going to be x and x. These last two terms multiply to give us 8, and they have to add up to give us negative 6. So since they're going to add up to negative, they're both going to be negative, right? Because a negative times a negative gives us positive. So it could be negative 1 and negative 8, or negative 2 and negative 4. We just need to figure out which ones add up to negative 6. So obviously, the only choice there would be negative 2 and negative 4. So x minus 2 times x minus 4. For the leading coefficient other than 1, that makes it a little bit more complicated. It's not as easy as this one where they multiply to give us this and add up to this. Here, we start off, the same thing happens. These first two have to multiply to give us 2x squared, but it's not going to be just x and x. One is going to have to be 2x, and one is going to have to be an x. Because of that 2x there, that's why it's not as easy as this. When we plug these numbers in, whatever we put in here still multiplies to give us the last term, but they don't add up to the middle term. What adds up to the middle term is this, whatever number we put in here, times x, plus whatever number we put in here, times 2x. Right, so those combined give us our 9x. Again, these two still multiply to give us negative 18. So we could have negative 1 and 18, 1 and negative 18, negative 2 and 9, 2 and negative 9, negative 3 and 6, or 3 and negative 6. Now, one thing you can keep in mind, the one that goes in here with the 2x cannot be divisible by 2, because if it was, we'd be able to factor out of everything. So one thing to kind of look for to help when you're guessing and checking. We're not going to put a minus 2 in here, because then we would be able to take a 2 out. We can't put a 6 in here, because we'd be able to take a 2 out. We can't put an 18 in here, because we'd have a 2 that we could take out. Right? 2 would go into both of them. So we've kind of narrowed it down a little bit. We know some things that we cannot put in there. But for this one, what's going to work is if we have a plus 6 here, that's going to give us 12x. And if we have a positive 6, we'd have to use a negative 3 to multiply to give us negative 18. And this right here is negative 3x. So 12x plus negative 3x gives us 9x. And our last type of factoring is actually a new one. Those first three we did earlier in the year. This is brand new to this chapter. If we have four terms, we need to factor by grouping. And what we're going to do is we're going to group the first two terms together, and then we're going to group the second two terms, second set of terms. So out of these first two terms, you need to look and figure out what can we take out of both. Look at the numbers. 3 goes into both of those, so we can take out a 3. They both have x's. We can factor out the smallest exponent, so x squared. If we take a 3x squared out of both of these, if we take it out of the first one, we end up 6 divided by 3 gives us 2. X cubed divided by x squared is just x. Right? We subtract those exponents. 9x squared divided by 3x squared. The x squareds divide and give us 1. Those cancel out. 9 divided by 3 is 3. Over here, 5 goes into both of these, but whenever this first one is a minus, we always want to factor out a negative. So we can factor out a negative 5. Negative 10x divided by negative 5 gives us 2x. Negative 15 divided by negative 5 gives us positive 3. Now, in order for factoring by grouping to work, these two things have to be exactly the same. If they're not, then this isn't going to work. Luckily, in this case, they are the same. So really what we're doing here is factoring again, right? We're factoring out a common term. These both have a 2x plus 3. So kind of what we're doing here is we're taking out a 2x plus 3 out of both of these, right? We're thinking of this as one big term, this is one big term. So if we divide this first term by 2x plus 3, all we have left is what's out in front, 3x squared. If we take this whole big term divided by 2x plus 3, all we have left is minus 5. Now, most people write it the other way. They just say, okay, we're going to have this minus this, 3x squared minus 5, times this, 2x plus 3. Right? Either one of these is fine, but be very, very careful. Just because there's two of these doesn't make this a squared. We're not multiplying them, right? We're subtracting. So it's like if we had 5x plus 3x, we don't get 8x squared, we just get 8x. Right? We don't have it squared because they're not being multiplied. Either of these are fine. You should not have any exponents on the end, though. Okay, what I'd like you guys to do now is go ahead and try these problems down below, 12, 13, and 14. You're going to have, the first one is going to be two terms, so you're going to try factoring the difference of two squares. Number 13, the trinomial, and the front here is not 1, so it's going to be one of these, leading coefficient other than 1. And then number 14, there's 4 terms, so that means we're going to have to try grouping. So those are things you're looking for when you do this on the test or on your other review. Look at how many terms there are to figure out which type you're going to do.